I'd like us to take a little time to dig deeper into the process of setting a goal with our clients. Our textbook really gives us the idea of how to approach that process with the spirit of motivational interviewing. But this talk is going to get us into sort of the nitty-gritty of what should those goals look like and how do we define and identify a really useful goal. So the first thing I want to just mention is that you are going to help your client define the real goal, which in this case is going to be the behavior that they're going to engage in, between this session and the next one. Sometimes you're going to have to help them to, nail that down into a specific goal from something broader that they start with. So for instance, if they came in there because of a lipid panel, they might tell you, well, my goal is to bring down my cholesterol. Great. That's a great starting point. Let's talk about how you're going to get there, right? Because lowering the blood cholesterol, that's the anticipated result. It's also known as the outcome goal. What might happen down the road that your client is aiming for. That might be something that you would be monitoring and evaluating for long term, but it's not what your client has control over right now. So we're going to work with the client to figure out what steps are you going to take, what behaviors are you going to engage in. So they might say, I'm going to start eating more vegetables. All right, that could work. But this is still very broad. So as you are working with your client, you're going to encourage them to start fleshing that out and defining exactly what that's going to look like. Well, how many vegetables are you going to have? How often? When? You might even talk to them about, what they're going to choose. So we're going to help them to get that goal to be more specific, like this example. Eat 2 servings of vegetables for lunch and again at dinner. So again, that's a specific goal. It's also a behavioral goal. It's a particular step or action that the client can take and that they can tell what is expected of them and when they achieved it and how. So let's kind of go into some more details about what we're looking for in these behavioral goals. Probably most, if not all of you, have heard of SMART goals before. You might not have all learned the acronym the exact same way, but that's okay because for this class, this is the version I want you to remember, and it's got a little twist. We're going to talk about SMART Plus goals, so you need that little positive sign at the end. SMART Plus goals are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound, and positive. If you utilize this acronym, you're going to help your clients to set particular behavioral goals that are most likely to help them achieve those long-term outcomes they are aiming for. So let's break this down a little bit. I kind of put specific, measurable, and time-bound together. They kind of are lumped together as the logistics of this goal. They address the what, the when, and the how. This is so we know very specifically when the goal has been attained or whether the goal was attained, right? And that should be clear to both the client and to you. So giving details to the goal helps your clients to be successful. And in particular, something to watch out for are, vague terms that are not well defined. So for instance, I'm going to use less salad dressing, or I'm going to eat more vegetables. I'm going to try to get to the gym once a week. Let's really put this in clear and positive terminology. When we say that the goals should be actionable, that means the client should have control over them. The clients can take that step or engage in that action. The goals should not depend on another person. It's absolutely okay, and I would even encourage clients to think about how they can engage their friends and family members as a support network and help them to stay motivated and on track. But the goal has to be about what the client will do, not what somebody else in their life is going to do. So for instance, it's not an appropriate goal. It's not actionable for the client to say, my friend is going to call me once a week and remind me to work out. Okay, that's not within the client's control. But an appropriate goal would be, I'm going to set a weekly workout date with my best friend. Okay, so that is something the client has control over, and so the client is going to follow through on that behavior. Now, the other thing I want to point out, because this is often confused by clients as well as counselors, is that weight loss is not a behavioral goal. The client does not have complete control over weight loss, right? There are a lot of factors that influence whether the number on the scale goes up or down. Now, there are certainly specific SMART Plus behavioral goals that the client could set that might get them toward weight loss. And if that is their long-term outcome goal, what they are anticipating they want to get out of their behavior changes, then you can help them to define specific behaviors that are going to help get them there. We will talk more in this course about whether aiming for weight loss is something that you want to encourage your client to do or maybe not. But if you are working with a client on this path, remember to help them set those actionable SMART Plus goals that they have control over. So never let your client walk out of a session and their goal is, I will lose X number of pounds this week. Right? Talk about changes to their eating or their physical activity, etc., that might help them get there. Of course, we want our client to choose realistic goals. So we always want to consider the client's starting point. If a client is currently not working out at all, setting a goal to start working out 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, might not, set them up for success. So remember that small changes count. Sometimes a client, again, who maybe isn't at all active right now, is only going to be willing to budge a little bit or comfortable setting that as a goal. So they might say, I am going to start walking in my neighborhood 15 minutes a week, period. You might be thinking, but you could do so much more. But the reality is, if that is what the client is comfortable doing at this time, it's an appropriate goal. And it's much more important for your client to successfully achieve that first goal and then feel like, okay, I've got this. Maybe I could do a little bit more than it is to, get your client to dive in the whole way and make this life-altering change. Because if that huge shift in behavior is not something that the client can follow through on, if they've basically set the bar too high for where they are right now, they're much more likely to not meet that goal. And then you get that internal monologue that comes up. I knew I couldn't do this. I'm such a failure. I'm never going to be able to make this change. I should just give up. And it's much more likely that that client is not going to come back and see you again either, because she's embarrassed, because he's upset with himself. And so you don't have the chance to continue to help that client to define a more appropriate goal. So you've missed that opportunity. And again, the client feels bad. The client hasn't helped themselves move toward health. And so nobody wins in that situation. So this is why it's so important to set realistic goals. And as part of that, don't let your client, commit to a laundry list of goals. If your client is incredibly motivated, I get that sometimes too, and they want to do like all the things that we talked about in the session. I love it that you want to try all of those things. Let's pick the top 3, the ones that are, this is what you're really going to focus on between now and the next time we meet. If you end up feeling like you want to take on more, great. But let's make it that these are the 3 that you're really committing to. I'm definitely going to start with these. And everything else is just, bonus. Again, you want to remember we are setting our client up for success. if we are realistic with the number of behavior changes that they can take on at one time, we are much more likely to see them come back and see them continue to add new behavior changes onto their list at that time because they were successful with the first ones. Okay, and positive goals. So that's what that plus is, right? When we talk about negative goals, those are ones where we say what we're not going to do or what we're going to take away. So the focus is on what they're going to miss out on, and that's really disheartening and depressing. Whereas a positive goal focuses the client on what they get to do, you know, what the new behaviors are going to be. And that kind of positive focus enhances, again, the chances that the client is going to be successful. Remember, that is what this is all about. So instead of a negative goal that might read like this, I won't eat ice cream for dessert on at least 3 days of the week. Okay, so now the client's thinking about all the times when they don't get to have ice cream. But if we reframe that, same idea, same exact idea, but we reframe it in a positive way so that the goal is focused on what the client will get to do, then it's much more likely that the client is going to, you know, commit to this and follow through. So this is the example. I will eat a yogurt parfait for my dessert at least 3 days of the week. So the implication here, of course, is that, you know, that is what they're eating instead of the ice cream. Really is telling us the same thing, right? There are a few days of the week when the client is not going to have the ice cream. But the phrasing makes all the difference in how the client feels about moving forward with that goal. So that is what you need to know about setting SMART plus behavioral goals that are going to help your client be successful in making behavior changes.